can you explain why most Christians are on the side of Israel concerning Israel and Palestine? And so that's a two-sided question. There's two answers to that question because firstly, I feel like a lot of congestion tonight. Firstly, we have biblical promises. So this is where if you take us all the way back to the Old Testament, and I can flip back into Genesis chapter 12, and you move on through there. But starting in Genesis 12, verse 3, God promises Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so here is where the first of 2 points is many, and I'd love to say most, Christians recognize that Israel has had a place in God's heart, but also a place in his great plan for the world. And he made a promise to Abraham, which we call the Abrahamic covenant. There are numerous covenants in the Old Testament. Sometimes we say the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, Old Testament, New Testament, but the Old Covenant or the Old Testament is filled with multiple covenants. And the Abrahamic covenant was a unilateral covenant, one way, one direction. God made it to Abraham. He didn't ask Abraham to do anything in order to receive these blessings. He just said, I'm going to bless you, Abraham, because I'm going to bless you. And I'm going to give you these descendants. I'm going to give you this nation. I'm going to give you this land. And all of that is part of the Abrahamic covenant. Later was a Mosaic covenant that had, if this, then that, if this, then that. And that's different. That's where we get the 10 Commandments and all the Old Testament laws. But with that was that first promise. I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. And I believe you can go historically and see how this has been true. You can go throughout history from over 2,000 years ago unto today, and you can watch whole nations that have been blessed when they bless Israel and have been cursed when they curse Israel. And so there's one side of that. And so with that part 1B of the answer of why do many Christians side with Israel when this whole Israel-Palestine thing, part B is the belief that God gave them that land. And so the whole conflict revolves around the land. And we believe God gave them the land. The Bible says God gave them the land. And part of that Abrahamic covenant is not only blessing those who bless you, so I want to be on the being blessed side. There's part A. Part B, part of that covenant was God says, I'm giving you that land. And so I believe God gave them that land. So that's kind of the part A of the answer to the question. Now the part B, though, you don't have to be a Christian to understand, which is simply, you guys might not be aware of this, but in the world today and in America today, there are polarizing sides on many issues. Did you know that there's like liberals and conservatives, and they vote differently? And the whole catch is this, though, is that when people are on one side and the other side, quite often they even both think they're right. Now, we all know that we're the ones on the right side, and they're all just crazy out there on the other side. But the point is that people obviously can have a twisted view of reality, and they can have a twisted view of morality, what's right and wrong, of what's truth and what's false, and people can be very convinced of these things. I don't think you have to be a Christian to look at history and understand modern Israel and follow their story historically. You can do it all on Wikipedia, which is not like the greatest resource, but it's public and it's out there. And I mean, you don't have to go to some like pro-Israel or ultra-conservative Christian or whatever site. You can just go to Wikipedia anyway and just start reading what happened. And after World War I, when the Ottomans had that area, the Ottoman Turks, Britain took over. And Britain had control of what was called Palestine. And it was named Palestina by the Romans when the Romans kicked the Jews out. They gave it the Latin name Palestina, which is the equivalent of Philistines. They named it after Israel's perennial enemy just to be an insult. right? And so that's kind of the idea of, they named it that as an insult, but it was Rome. And it actually never became an independent state called Palestine. There never was an independent state. But the region got a name, and the name of that region stuck when Rome gave it that name. So fast forward again, Britain has taken over this region, but before that the Ottomans had it, before that someone else had it. It's always been owned by different countries all around. And so even though it was called Palestine, it was never ever Palestine with its own flag and its own money and its own government. It was always owned by other people. When Britain left, they said, well, here's the deal. Because it's World War II is now ended. Okay, so it's the end of World War II. The Holocaust has happened. Jews have been forced to leave Europe, and Jews are fleeing out of Russia because they're being murdered in mass numbers. And they go back to the only place they can think to go, Israel. And they're being allowed back in at this point. So in 48, what they basically say is Britain says, we're leaving, and we're giving this land to you native people who are here. There's Palestinians here. There are Jews here. They said, we think a two-state solution would be a good idea. We're going to give 52% to the Palestinians and 48% to the Jews. To which the Jews answered, it's not as much as we want, but we'll take it. The Palestinians said, no, all or nothing. We're not sharing with the Jews. We don't want to share. Well, they left and told the Jews, well, you can have your 48%. And so in May of 1948, the Jews become a nation of Israel with their 48%. And on that night, they're attacked by every single surrounding Arab nation. They're a brand new nation. They have no formal military. They have no formal anything. And from that day forward, they had been attacked by the surrounding nations numerous times. Now in 48, they expanded their territory following the international laws of war. There are international laws we follow. When you break those laws, you commit what's called war crimes, right? But as long as you're following those rules, you're okay. I don't want to spend all night on one question. But in short, because I've done this before a little bit as we talked about Israel, but in short, they expanded. In 67, when Lebanon and Syria from the north and Egypt from the south were going to come in and attack again, Israel did a preemptive strike to try and save themselves from utter annihilation. Because again, we're talking about thousands of tanks and planes lining up on the border, getting ready to invade. So Israel did fire the first shot because they knew if we don't, we're not going to make it. They asked Jordan, please don't attack. If you don't attack, then we won't have to fight you. You don't fight us, and we can just keep everything the way it is. Jordan had control of the temple. The area over there, what's called the West Bank today, was all part of Jordan. But when they fought against the people who they knew were going to invade, Jordan was their allies, and so Jordan attacked. So Israel fought back, and they pushed north into Lebanon and Syria, into what's called the Golan Heights today. They pushed south into what is the Gaza Strip. They took all of the Sinai Peninsula. It was after the Yom Kippur War when they were surprise attacked on their most holy day, when they're all practicing Sabbath, not either fasting and they're not using electronics. All their enemies attack, of course, on that day. After Yom Kippur, they gave back Sinai to Egypt because they thought Egypt might actually have peace with us if we give them this land. And they did, and they've had peace ever since. And so, in short, a lot of the biggest issue with the Palestinians and the argument of the unfair treatment of Israel is that they put walls up everywhere. So anywhere there's West Bank, there are walls. To get into Jerusalem from the West Bank, you go through walls and checkpoints. To get in and out of Bethlehem, huge cement walls and checkpoints. To get in and out of Gaza, big walls. And that sounds so mean and horrible. But in the 90s and the early 2000s, when we had the Intifadas, daily suicide bombers were walking into places where people eat, buses, etc. There were daily bombings going off in Jerusalem and all around Israel. Daily, hundreds of people, 30 people, 10 people, 5 people are being killed. We have to stop suicide bombers from just showing up out of nowhere every day. They built the walls, all the bombing stopped. Because they were controlling who can come in and out of their territory. It wasn't to keep people out. Most of the people who live in those areas, many of them don't work there. They work in Israel. They can get in and out. you work, you have your visa, you pass through the checkpoint every day. So the people in the Palestinian territories, they come into Israel and work in Israel all the time. So part A, why do Christians support Israel? Well, we said the biblical promises. The promise of, if you bless them, I'll bless you. I went in on that promise. The promise that God has given them that land. I agree with God. And on the other side is just sheerly logical. Looking through history, understanding the order of events, and seeing as my mom, she lived in Israel when she was younger and whatnot. And so I kind of grew up in a home that knew a lot about Israel. But, she explained it to me when I was in high school. She's like, son, if America was here and British Columbia was just lobbing rockets into Bellingham on a daily basis, would America just sit and watch? But we all know what's going on now. But what people don't understand is many of you, I'm just going to assume that you're normal. Maybe you're a prophecy nut, an Israel person, you're not normal. But the average American was aware of October 7th and what happened. But if you had asked them about the months leading up to that, August, September, they couldn't have told you how many missiles had been fired during those times. But the missiles go year round. They don't always happen every day, but all of a sudden, 100 missiles. And I post on Facebook, it's like, it doesn't come to our news. It never hits our news. 400 missiles were shot last night from Gaza into Israel. And it's like, we don't hear about that. But it's kind of like, when you're being shot at all the time with missiles, it's like, eventually you got to just go in and say, okay, enough's enough. And October 7th was just we're done. And if you're not familiar, again, that was just a vicious thing. And the way it's so easy to know what's going on is because many of the people who committed all the crimes posted their videos onto TikTok. So you can follow them as they were going into houses and murdering people, women, babies murdered in their cribs, elderly people, those were the targets. And it's the reality of it, that they were just going out and just wiping people out for the sake of killing as many people as they could. And when you think of how small Israel's whole country can fit into the Puget Sound area, right? Bellingham down to Portland, north to South Washington, but about as wide as from the Puget Sound to the Cascades. It's a small country. And so it'd be kind of like, 100,000 people being killed here. It's a big number. So why do most Christians side with the side of Israel? It's because of that. It's because of just morality and logic. You can see they're not perfect. And they don't have any kind of get out of jail free card because they're Israel. They make bad choices. They do things the wrong way sometimes. They're not free from making mistakes, but on the whole, they're doing what any civilized nation would do if they were put into that situation.